Hello and welcome to Global Economic Perspectives. I'm Michael Reynolds, and today we're discussing a topic that affects millions of families across two continents, the high cost of living and its impact on families in the U.S. and Europe. Joining me is my colleague and economic analyst, Emma Chen. Emma, great to have you with us today.
Thanks, Michael. It's great to be here. This is such a pressing issue for families on both sides of the Atlantic. The rising cost of living has been squeezing household budgets significantly over the past few years, and the latest data from 2025 shows some concerning trends.
Absolutely, Emma. Let's start with grocery prices, since that's something every family deals with weekly. According to the latest Numbeo Groceries Index for 2025, the United States ranks ninth globally with an index of 71.7, while European countries show quite a range. Switzerland tops the charts at 103.1, making it about 44% more expensive than the U.S. for groceries.
That's right, Michael. And what's fascinating is the huge disparity across European cities. According to Deutsche Bank's 2025 Grocery Index, Geneva and Zurich are actually more expensive than New York, with grocery costs 6% and 3% higher, respectively. But if you look at cities like Budapest or Warsaw, groceries cost only about 37% of what they do in New York. That's a massive difference within Europe itself.
And that regional disparity is really important to understand. Paris grocery prices are about 54% higher than Madrid's, despite both being major EU capitals. A typical grocery basket in Paris costs about 107 euros, but only 73 euros in Madrid. Even within the same country, we see differences, like London being 21% more expensive for groceries than Birmingham.
These disparities hit families differently depending on their income levels. For a middle-class family spending, say, 10 to 15% of their income on groceries, these differences might be manageable. But for lower-income families who might spend up to 30% of their income on food, these price differences are literally life-changing.
Let's shift gears and talk about transportation costs, which is another major expense for families. The median American family spends around 15% of their income on transportation, while the median European family spends only about 12%. That 3% difference represents thousands of dollars annually that American families could be using for other necessities or savings.
And transportation costs have increased dramatically in both regions. In the U.S., logistics costs have surged to about $2.6 trillion in 2025. That's nearly 9% of GDP, and $1 trillion more than what we saw in 2019. These increased shipping and transportation costs ultimately get passed on to consumers.
That's a great point, Emma. We often don't think about how logistics costs impact everyday prices. When shipping costs go up 93% year over year, as we've seen with water transport, those costs eventually show up in the price of everything from furniture to electronics to foods.
And let's talk about public transportation, which many families rely on. In European cities, public transit is generally more affordable and accessible. For example, a monthly transit pass in Lisbon costs under 50 euros, while Londoners pay around £150 or more. In the U.S., transit costs and availability vary dramatically by city, but many American families have no choice but to maintain one or more vehicles, which adds thousands in annual costs.
The car dependency in the U.S. really drives up family budgets. Between car payments, insurance, fuel, and maintenance, the average American household spends about $10,000 annually on personal vehicles, money that European families often can direct elsewhere.
And we should mention that fuel prices continue to be significantly higher in Europe than in the U.S., although Europeans often drive smaller, more fuel-efficient vehicles and shorter distances. So their overall transportation spending remains lower.
Now, I think we need to address services, everything from haircuts to childcare to home repairs. Services in the U.S. tend to be more expensive than in many parts of Europe, particularly Eastern and Southern Europe. However, Western European countries like France and Germany often have similar or higher service costs compared to the U.S.
That's right, Michael. And one service category that's particularly important is childcare. In the U.S., families spend an average of 23% of their household income on childcare for one child. Compare that to countries like Germany, where it's around 5%, or France at about 9%. This huge disparity means American families with young children face a significant financial burden that their European counterparts don't.
The childcare situation in the U.S. is particularly challenging because it creates a double bind for families. Either pay these extremely high costs or have one parent reduce work hours or leave the workforce entirely, which further reduces household income.
And when we look at other services like internet, phone plans, and utilities, we again see higher costs in the U.S. compared to many European countries. For example, in Portugal, monthly utilities for an 85 m² apartment average about 94 to 110 euros, compared to over £200 in the UK and often higher in the U.S.
Let's talk about housing costs now, which remain a crisis point on both continents. According to Demography's 2025 International Housing Affordability Report, housing affordability has reached crisis levels, especially in major cities. In the U.S., home prices have increased 60% since 2019, with the median single-family home price hitting $412,500 in 2024, about 5 times the median household income.
And Europe isn't faring much better. According to a 2025 Eurocities monitor, over 1/3 of European mayors report that housing costs in their cities are unaffordable, meaning average incomes are no longer enough to cover sustainable rent or mortgage payments. Only 14% of cities reported that housing remains affordable for their residents.
The housing crisis is pushing families further from urban centers, which then increases their transportation costs and commute times. It's a vicious cycle. In both the U.S. and Europe, we're seeing more multi-generational households as young adults can't afford to move out or establish their own homes.
That's exactly right. And rent burdens have increased substantially too. In the U.S., nearly half of all renters now spend more than 30% of their income on housing, which is the traditional threshold for affordability. In many European cities, the situation is similar, with rental costs in cities like London, Paris, and Amsterdam requiring 40 to 50% of average incomes.
Finally, we can't discuss the cost of living without addressing healthcare, which is perhaps the starkest difference between the U.S. and Europe. In 2023, the U.S. spent $13,432 per person on healthcare, nearly twice the average of comparable wealthy countries, which was about $7,393 per person.
And despite that higher spending, health outcomes in the U.S. aren't better. The U.S. performs worse on common health metrics like life expectancy and infant mortality. For American families, this means not only higher insurance premiums, deductibles, and out-of-pocket costs, but also the constant anxiety about potential medical bankruptcies, something that's virtually unheard of in Europe.
Healthcare costs in the U.S. take up about 16.7% of GDP as of 2023, which is substantially higher than in European countries. For example, France spends about 11% of GDP on healthcare, Germany around 12%, and the UK about 10%. And yet, as you mentioned, Europeans generally receive more comprehensive coverage.
It's not just the percentage, but where that money goes. The U.S. spends over $1,000 per person just on administrative costs, almost 5 times more than the average of other wealthy countries. That's money not going to actual care.
So, looking at the complete picture, higher costs for groceries, transportation, services, housing, and healthcare, how are families coping with all this, Emma?
It's challenging, Michael. Many families are cutting back on discretionary spending first. Fewer restaurant meals, delayed vacations, and postponed major purchases. But as inflation continues to affect essentials, we're seeing more concerning adaptations. Reducing food quality, delaying healthcare, taking on additional debt, or working multiple jobs.
And are there differences in how American versus European families are handling these pressures?
European families generally have stronger social safety nets to fall back on, more substantial unemployment benefits, family allowances, subsidized childcare, and of course, universal health care. These programs don't eliminate financial stress, but they do provide a more stable floor. American families often have fewer public supports and may rely more on family networks, community resources, or simply doing without.
It's worth noting that inflation has affected lower-income households more severely in both regions. The ECB has reported that recent inflation has hit low-income European households